What if you took the most popular women's magazines, Cosmo, Glamour, Vogue, Elle, and made them conservative? Instead of giving women tips for feeling confident in their own skin, you could encourage them to dress to appeal to men. Instead of advice for getting ahead in their careers, you could position being a stay-at-home mom and housewife as the ultimate dream. Instead of feminism, you could push femininity. That's Eevee, a traditional women's magazine with even more traditional values. But hidden beneath the surface of glossy photos and high-profile interviews, there's something sinister lurking. Regressive gender roles, distrust in science and medicine, compulsory Christianity, and thinly veiled misogyny. Eevee is selling an alt-right ideology to unsuspecting young women, all packaged as the future of femininity. This is Eevee Exposed. Hi, I'm Ileana. Welcome back to Eevee Exposed, where we talk about Evie Magazine and all of its insidious content. Today, we are going to be deep diving into the thin propaganda that Eevee promotes. We're going to talk about how they push skinny culture on young women and the ties to authoritarianism. Because one of the ways fascist and authoritarian regimes controls people is through promoting an ideal body type and controlling what people's bodies look like. So let's get into it. If you want to know more about Evie Magazine and its founders and its origins, you can watch my previous video in this series, which is kind of a general overview of what Evie Magazine is. But for today, we're going to talk about how Evie Magazine wants women to waste away. It's safe to say that conservatives are obsessed with policing other people's weight. This should come as no surprise to us because the right has made it incredibly clear that they are overly concerned with other people's bodies. They're worried about what genitalia trans people have, they're concerned about what people do with their own uteruses, and they think bodily autonomy is optional. Conservatives claim they're the party of small government, but then they want politicians making medical decisions for people, specifically women, children, and LGBTQ+ individuals. Evie Magazine, which positions itself as conservative Cosmo, pushes thinness in their articles and on social media, and it's clear that that's part of the ethos of their brand. They've called skinny talk influencer Liv Schmidt a martyr for getting kicked off of TikTok because her content promotes disordered eating. They posted the Curvy Girls Spring Shopping Guide, and apparently their definition of curvy is just size 6 with boobs. Calling these women curvy is insane and honestly just delusional. These women aren't curvy, they're just thin with a bust. It very much feels like Evie Magazine wants to go back to the 90s tabloid world that called Jessica Simpson fat for being 130 pounds. Now let's dive into one of the articles that I found on their site. In this article, Pinterest under fire for new body type feature that prioritizes obesity and excludes other figures. They complain that Pinterest filters aren't adequately representing the full range of women's bodies. This is the tweet that the article is based on. There are 16 body types here, and they do a decent job getting different body types and shapes and sizes in here. Is it perfect? No, obviously not, but it probably works for a majority of women. Here's what Eevee has to say though. Unfortunately, their attempt at inclusivity flopped by including only different types of obesity and plus-sized women. While there were a few thin models, there was a lack of hourglass or apple figures and athletic women. Sorry, are we looking at the same picture here? They say Pinterest included only different types of obesity and plus-sized women, and then one sentence later admit there were a few thin models. I think maybe we need a refresher on what only means. There was a lack of hourglass or apple figures and athletic women. Girl, what? There are numerous hourglass figures, apple figures, and athletic figures in here. These 16 options do show a range of body types, body shapes, and figures, even if they don't fit into the categories of just apple shape or pear shape. Here's the conclusion of the article. Pinterest's intentions might have been good, but their execution left a lot to be desired. Creating filters for body types could have been groundbreaking if they actually represented the diverse shapes of real people. Somehow, they've managed to alienate nearly everyone who doesn't fit a very narrow mold, or ironically, a very wide one. Thin, athletic, pregnant, of course they always have to mention pregnancy to fit their pronatalist quota on the site. And average-sized users all feel left out. For a feature claiming to embrace inclusivity, it's painfully exclusive. I also have to point out that when they said a very narrow mold, or ironically, a very wide one, they are just actively fat-shaming people. So here's the thing, right? I don't necessarily disagree that the execution of this feature isn't perfect, but this article makes it sound like their solution is to just go back to apple, pear, hourglass and rectangle? I don't even remember what those categories were. They're so close to getting the point. Putting women's bodies into strict categories doesn't make sense because it isn't inclusive enough, but their solution is to exclude even more people. It's wild to say that these 16 categories aren't enough, so we should just go back to 3. If we can't make inclusivity perfect, they think we should just get rid of it altogether. The truth of the matter is that they hate inclusivity. It's why they hate pronouns, it's why they hate gender-neutral bathrooms and terms like pregnant people. This is just another example of how they pretend to be progressive, we care about body representation, while pushing a regressive agenda. The bodies should only be skinny. Here's an Instagram reel they posted that pretty perfectly encapsulates this message. What we wanted, traditional Victoria's Secret angels who all have the exact same body type, but there's diversity because there's like 2 women of color in there. What we got, diversity, range, freshness. It's giving, I swear we want inclusivity. No, not like that. Even before they show, they posted a critique on Instagram writing, Victoria's Secret says it's going back to its unapologetically sexy roots, but insiders claim this year's show is shaping up to be a disaster. From more trans and plus size models than ever before to an identity crisis that still hasn't been solved, the brand's comeback might not be as glamorous as promised. But hey, at least we have WNBA star Angel Reese walking, because we all know the WNBA brings in the viewers. They apparently think this kind of caption is witty and cute, but it shows us what they really think. They don't want trans models, plus size models, or athletes on their runways. This part really gets me because we all know the WNBA brings in the viewers. The sarcasm gives us insight into their views. They support women, but undermine and ridicule female athletes. Conservatives made an entire bigoted campaign about caring about women's sports, but then they also use women athletes as the butt of the joke. Cool. It just falls into the constant hypocrisy that we see from conservatives. We care about women in sports, but do they watch women's sports? No. Do they support female athletes? No, unless they place 5th in a swimming competition, I guess. Then they care. The weight shaming goes beyond the articles on their website. The TikTok famous raw milkmaid dress, which was a creation of Eevee founder Brittany Hugo Boom, only comes in 4 sizes, the largest of which is 12 to 14. The average American woman is a size 16 to 18. So beyond the articles on their website, they are pushing this narrative that the only body sizes that are acceptable are under a size 12 to 14. In interviews, founder and editor-in-chief Brittany Hugo Boom spoke pretty candidly about her body. When they were speaking to the New York Times, her husband Gabriel talked about how he grew up in Memphis as one of 8 children to naturopath parents. They were very maha before maha was even a thing, he said, referring to the Make America Healthy Again slogan of RFK Jr. On one early date, Mr. Hugo Boom recalled, he took Mrs. Hugo Boom to Whole Foods to introduce her to real cheese as opposed to the American kind. You probably saved me from obesity, said Mrs. Hugo Boom, who joked that she grew up on Lunchables. Saved me from obesity. It shows that this is so deeply ingrained in their beliefs that they might not even recognize how much they are pushing this skinny narrative on their consumers. Let's look through some more examples of the fat shaming, diet promoting content and talk about why it matters. Skinny talk is helping girls lose weight for good. If you loved your body, you would take care of it. Moms owe it to their children to not get fat. Ex-fat people share their underrated weight loss tips that actually work. Women are using ChatGPT to lose weight. Here's how you can too. On the surface, it kind of looks like normal, if outdated, magazine advice. But given what we know about Eevee's conservative right-wing ideology, we need to go one step deeper. I'm sure I'm going to lose some people here because it'll seem like a stretch, but stick with me because this analysis is necessary. Lois Shearing, journalist and author of Pink-Pilled, Women in the Far Right, wrote in an article, if you've read a fashion magazine lately, you may have noticed that thin is once again in. What you may not have realized, however, is the influence the far right has had in promoting this dangerous trend. Julia Ebner, author of Going Mainstream, How Extremists Are Taking Over, told Lois, fascist ideologies in the past and today tend to paint an idealized vision of the human body, and women's bodies in particular are seen as vessels for producing the next generation of pure and strong children. With the rise of far-right movements, we also see a return of narrow-minded beauty ideals and body shaming. Thinness is a moral imperative, they explain. While the body positivity and body neutrality movements preach that our bodies are not good or bad, they are morally neutral, Christian nationalism preaches the opposite. Christian nationalism thrives on control of people's religion, politics, beliefs, sex lives, and bodies. Christian nationalism also calls for self-sacrifice, and there's nothing more sacrificial than starving yourself for the Lord. You need to punish yourself to be worthy, to be godly, to be a martyr, like Liv Schmidt. New York Times columnist Jessica Gross said in an interview, so there's a distinct idea that overeating or gluttony, which is one of the 7 deadly sins, is immoral. And if your body size is not whatever society thinks is an appropriate body size, that is a sin. Then there's a whole thing that really dovetails into the Maha movement about the purity of food, and that also can be secular. You hear tons of people who are not religious talk about toxins and eating things that are bad for your body and how that is morally abhorrent. But I think there's a direct language of the sin of gluttony. And you see it all the time with creators on social media who directly talk about it that way, that overeating is sinful, gluttonous, bad, morally impure. So how exactly does thinness tie to authoritarian regimes? Lois says, thin bodies are seen as being more likely to be abled and therefore more likely to be strong enough to fight for or birth the nation/race. Thin supremacy also feeds into white supremacy. The type of slenderness that is privileged is one modeled on the bodies of white women. Professor Brian Pronger calls this body fascism. We also see that thinness is innately tied to femininity in these communities, and they uphold femininity as what all women should strive for. This focus on femininity pushes people to conform to strict gender roles that oppress women. And what's more feminine than shrinking yourself so small that you basically don't exist? Lois also spoke with Hazel Woodrow, who is a researcher at Anti-Hate Canada, and she focuses on digital subcultures of teenage girls, including pro-anorexia and far-right extremist communities. She told Lois, if I was trying to radicalize a young girl, I would incite an eating disorder because your capacity of critical thought is kneecapped by starvation, and it would be easy to introduce a radicalized aspect to it. What better way to control people than to starve them out of their capacity for critical thinking? It's the same reason we see such strict adherence to diets and control over food when it comes to cults. And these diets aren't always obvious and traditional. They can also look like Maha wellness and orthorexia. Strict diets such as all meat, all raw vegan, or anti-seed oils have become ways for members of these communities to show their in-group status and link their beliefs to their diet, Hazel Woodrow says. The judgment of women's bodies goes beyond magazine articles and social media posts. We see it explicitly at the top levels of our government. I'm not sharing any breaking news here by mentioning Donald Trump's outwardly misogynistic comments. He makes a habit of objectifying women, criticizing their appearance, and putting all their value in his perception of their beauty, or lack thereof. He called Alicia Machado Miss Piggy, said Rosie O'Donnell has a fat, ugly face, said Kim Kardashian has a fat ass, famously called Hillary Clinton nasty, called Stormy Daniels horse face, said Bette Midler has an ugly face and body. I could go on. Because this attitude has become so normalized, nobody bats an eye when the leader of the free world makes his disdain for women obvious. And this hatred for women isn't isolated to men in power. Women in power have internalized it too. Instead of fighting against it and encouraging women to be confident in their bodies and in their power, they're insistent on dragging the whole population down with them. If I can't feel good about my body, nobody should. It's a regressive and childish way of thinking, but that's a feature of Republican politics right now. And Evie Magazine, which pushes this agenda, is no exception. One of the interesting things to me, I used to write for magazines and websites, not like Eevee, but you know, a similar type of website, just not for conservatives, is that these writers might not even realize that they are like pushing an authoritarian agenda. It is so ingrained in them to feel such shame around their bodies and to only believe that women should be skinny that they're pushing it no matter what. But they might not be making the ties to fascism and authoritarianism. They probably aren't. And that's kind of the entire point. Magazines like Eevee make authoritarian content digestible for young women, for the general population, for the public to consume without really thinking about it. When most people see content about like a new diet or a fad exercise trend that they should try, they're not questioning why that's being pushed on them. They're not saying, I wonder what the deeper motive is here. And that makes sense, but like, who's thinking that? No one. You have to dig kind of deep and look at academic research to realize how connected thinness is to authoritarianism. But I think the simplest way to break it down is that fascist and authoritarian regimes rely on controlling the populace. And one tool to do that is by controlling people's bodies. If you want people to fall in line and strictly adhere to the guidance that you give them, why not start with something that feels as simple as the ideal body? It gives people something to strive for, something to work toward. Meanwhile, it's actually a tool of oppression that leaders use as they tighten their grip on society. Anyway, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Have you noticed that thin is in again? Have you ever thought about how thinness is connected to right-wing ideologies before? If you want more information on this topic, I always put my sources down below. So anywhere that I grabbed a quote from, any information that I got, any resources that I found really helpful, you can find those in the description. I have so much more planned for this series. We're going to do deep dives on lots of other aspects of Evie Magazine. So if you like this content, please, please, please subscribe, like, follow, whatever, all of the things that you do on YouTube. If you're new here, I'm Ileana. You can find me on all social media as @IleanaJustine. I would love to have you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.